Have you ever accidentally gotten into a real-life conspiracy, perhaps at work or school or university? Like people doing suspicious things or government psyops? Just anything at all that you don't think you were supposed to see?
I don't know where else to post this because they shut me down on any other platform that I could think of, so I guess I'm posting here instead. I was in Iraq in 2006 doing interrogations in support of 5th Special Forces Group. We were located in the southwestern corner of Victory Base Complex. This was the area they called the Radwania Palace Complex. Because of the absurd number of palaces and other fancy resort-style living arrangements used by Saddam and the Iraqi ruling elite, our job was to question high-value individuals. This meant we had priority for anyone we thought was more important, influential, or knowledgeable than the average bomb thrower. The idea was that we would do some intensive, long-term interrogation, but the reality was pretty disappointing. Everything was pretty mundane and even boring, and by this time everyone had accepted that there were no stockpiles of WMDs. At the same time, the Iraqis were starting to turn on each other. This was after the Golden Mosque bombing, which basically kicked off the Iraqi civil war. But that's not what this post is really about. We were looking for a place where we could have an isolated facility for our high-value detainees, where they wouldn't be able to interact with each other or the general population you'd find in one of the larger detention centers. This was back when Cropper and Abu Ghraib were still in business. We found a couple of small buildings that looked decent, with high walls and enough space for maybe 20 closet-sized cells. One of the places we looked at was this brick building in the middle of the forest. I'm using the term forest loosely, as nothing in Iraq qualifies as a forest, the same way you'd think of Washington State or Yellowstone or something. This was just a bunch of trees, kind of out in the middle of nowhere. Every night you could see big swarms of bats coming out of the trees from the south. They would fly over the big lake in front of the Radwania palaces and eat the insects. The water was pretty stagnant. Anyway, this forest had a small gray building in the middle of it. It was a round building that was covered in dark marble on the outside, but made of reinforced concrete on the inside. It had a heavy metal gate hidden behind a thick wooden door. At the time, we had no idea what the purpose of this building was. Some kind of storage facility for Saddam's palaces? There were no windows, plumbing, or furniture. We didn't think it was some kind of residence because it looked more like a prison. The EOD guys had already inspected it and found nothing wrong. We had no idea what the building was supposed to be. We also didn't really care, so we said screw it and brought in a bunch of plywood and started setting things up. What we ended up with was a large circular room the guards could hang out in, and a second room where we would keep the detainees. Each detainee had their own plywood cell with a foam mattress, a blanket, and a Quran. The place didn't have any plumbing, so the guards would escort the detainees outside to use a porta potty they set up. The military intelligence team had a separate wooden shack where we could run our classified computers and write our reports. It took us like 2 weeks to get everything set up, and then the Special Forces guys started bringing detainees in. Like I said, this was boring work. This was a really shitty time to be in Iraq because the violence was exploding, and nobody knew what was going on. Our soldiers weren't trained as investigators, so they tended to just grab anyone they thought looked suspicious and bring them in for questioning. Like, if a bomb went off, they would just snatch everyone on the street and bring them in. Their philosophy was that they were too busy to care who was actually guilty, and the military intelligence guys would sort it all out. We also had an Iraqi Special Forces team who were supposed to be really, really good. Looking back on it, I'll bet they were basically just a hit squad that would target old regime Sunni Baathists they wanted gone. Everything in Iraq was a gang or a mafia or whatever. We didn't really care because they were on our side for the moment, and that was good enough for us. So we've been running this place for basically a week when the Iraqi Special Forces brings in a detainee. I don't remember his name and it isn't important. They accused him of being some high-level Baathist in Saddam's government, and he had been a fugitive since the original invasion. At this point, we were all pretty jaded. Saying someone was part of the Baath regime didn't really mean anything. You could throw a rock in Baghdad and it would probably hit a former regime Baathist. I'm just going to call him Hajj. They bring in Hajj blindfolded, which was the standard operating procedures for transporting detainees. The guards led him, still blindfolded, to the rooms where they took his photo and fingerprints and all that. Then they brought him to the interrogation booth. I call it a booth because that's the generic term Army interrogators use for any interrogation space. We just say, "I'm going in the booth," or whatever. This particular room was a small space with marble floors and tiles on the walls. Basically, everything in these fancy palaces was covered with mosaic tile patterns on the walls. Anyway, they bring Hodge into the booth with Sergeant Smith. I'm not going to use his real name for obvious reasons, but it will suffice to know that he was an E6 who transferred in from the infantry. He didn't really know what he was doing. Nobody at that time really knew what we're doing, but he was worse than most. He had been paid an obscene amount of money to reclass into 35M, Human Intelligence Collector, because they were trying to expand the military occupational specialty and we were short on non-commissioned officers. Staff Sergeant Smith was great at running teams, training weapons, keeping accountability, and all the stuff you would expect an infantry non-commissioned officer to be good at. But he was freaking useless when it came to anything military intelligence related, so we used him as an administrator and a screener. Staff Sergeant Smith's job was to ask the detainees some basic questions, like their name, their religion, their birthplace, and so on. This was all basic background stuff that anyone should have been able to answer without provoking any resistance. Then once we had the basic information down, we would assign the detainee to an interrogator, and they would start formulating their strategy. This was basically the extent of the work we could trust Staff Sergeant Smith to do as far as actual interrogations. Anyway, Hodge comes in, and they take off the blindfold. He takes one look around the room and sees the tile patterns on the walls. And the guy starts screaming. I mean, screaming. I've never heard anything like it. He is absolutely freaking out. Staff Sergeant Smith doesn't know what to do. He hasn't even asked a question yet. But the guy keeps screaming and kicking and thrashing, about to the point we think he's going to hurt himself. Eventually, we have to just cancel the interrogation, terminate, and the guards basically drag him out of the room. Of course, this is the start of a total shit show. I should mention that this was post-Abu Ghraib, so everyone involved was very anxious about abuse allegations. When they hear about this detainee screaming at the top of his lungs, everyone from the guard commander to the Victory Base Complex commanding general wants to know what happened. Staff Sergeant Smith, the guards, and the observers all have to give sworn statements that say they never saw any misconduct. Staff Sergeant Smith didn't touch the guy, didn't even speak to him. Like I said, he just looked at the walls and lost his mind. Eventually, Hodge calms down, and we try to re-engage the next day. We had to drive him to Cropper because he was going insane being in that building. The interrogators at Cropper let Staff Sergeant Smith go in again, and this time the guy is willing to talk. He claims he was a senior police officer in the Saddam regime, and he knew that building was something called the Hole. He had been in it before, and he knew that anyone who went into the hole never came out. When he saw what room he was in, he assumed we were about to murder him. So we go back and we ask the guards if they've seen anything weird. We're starting to think this was some kind of execution chamber, so it's possible there is still some evidence of human rights abuses or murders that we could use against Saddam. This was still 2006, so Saddam's trial was in progress. He wasn't executed until December. Some of the guards in the round office tell us the tiles in the floor are loose. Okay, great. Now we have to call in Criminal Investigation Division to look for human remains or something. But Staff Sergeant Smith doesn't want to wait. He thinks he's cool, and he wants to do everything himself. So he just starts pulling up the tiles, and we find that there's a false floor with a few layers of plywood covering a hole. And this was pretty new, like definitely installed within the last few years. We're thinking, at this point, that somebody tried to cover up a mass grave or something during the invasion and hoped the Americans would never find it. The hole itself is basically round and 2 meters wide, and it goes down a long way. Literally, the first thing Staff Sergeant Smith does is break a chem light and drop it down the hole. It falls down so far we can't see the light. There's no splash or echo or anything. It just drops until the light vanishes. So we toss a few more bricks and stuff in there, and there's no sound at all. Staff Sergeant Smith is determined to figure this out. This was before smartphones had high-quality cameras, and we didn't have any cameras on hand that we could lower on a rope or anything like that. But Staff Sergeant Smith went to Pathfinder School, and he's really proud of it. He knows how to rappel down and he's a certified expert at moving equipment on ropes. So he grabs a decently long rope from the Humvee, ties a Swiss seat, and clips himself on. I can't overemphasize how stupid this is. But nobody stops him, so Staff Sergeant Smith starts to rappel down. At first, everything is going great. He talks to us and tells us how it's cold in the hole, but he can't see or smell anything. The rope is at least 100 feet long, tied to the Humvee's trailer hitch outside, so we can't imagine he would abruptly run out of rope. We've got a private sitting in the Humvee in case we need to pull him out quickly. Staff Sergeant Smith keeps going down, and he shouts up to tell us he is breaking another chem light. So we wait about 3 seconds, and then he starts screaming. He didn't even have time to tell us what he was scared of. Staff Sergeant Smith just screams, "Shit, shit, shit!" And then he starts screaming in pain. It's even worse than the Hodge screaming before. I have no idea what was happening down there. I imagine that's how someone would scream if they were being eaten alive. Now the guards are shouting at the private to get him out of there. He starts letting the Humvee roll forward, and the rope starts coming up. The guard sergeant is standing over the edge of the pit, looking down into the hole while the rope comes up. I should mention at this point that Staff Sergeant Smith did not have a weapon. None of the interrogators did. The guards had nightsticks, but the only weapon allowed in the facility was an M9 the guard sergeant carried. The other weapons were locked up, so everyone is shouting, and Staff Sergeant Smith is screaming down in the hole, and the rope is coming up but not fast enough. Then the guard sergeant pulls out his weapon and fires 3 shots down the hole. Everything stops. Most people underestimate how loud a gunshot actually is, especially in a small concrete room like that. We can't hear anything, just the squealing sound of early onset tinnitus. But Staff Sergeant Smith isn't screaming anymore. I'm sure of that. The rope keeps coming up, but Staff Sergeant Smith never comes with it. Eventually, the rope is covered in blood and black slime. The guards ordered everyone out. I never saw what happened next. To this day, I have no idea what happened. There was a 15-6, then Criminal Investigation Division got involved, and we all wrote a bunch of sworn statements. They transferred all of the interrogators to Cropper, and we were never allowed to speak to the guards again. We weren't from the same unit, so I didn't have much reason to ever interact with them. All I know is what I heard from some buddies in 5th Group. The Army brought in demolitionists and did a controlled detonation that leveled the entire building. They paved over it with a slab of concrete and set up a fence around the site. There were signs telling people not to enter the forest because the bats carried rabies. I never found out what happened to Staff Sergeant Smith. I never saw a copy of the 15-6 or any official determination on the cause of death. I looked up his obituary later and saw it was attributed to a mortar attack, the kind of random thing that could strike anybody for no reason. I also heard the guard sergeant took his own life. I wish I had more answers. I wish I could make this a better story. I just don't know for sure what happened after we left. If anyone else was there, please let me know. The only thing I know for sure, and I put this on all my sworn statements, is that Staff Sergeant Smith wasn't the only person screaming in that hole.
That's totally nuts. Iraq after the fall of Saddam was a wild place, with a whole bunch of groups trying to get a piece of anything that wasn't nailed down. Even the old Ba'ath Party members were trying to get back in power. It's not strange, especially since they're in other Arab countries and basically espouse a Sunni Islam/Pan-Arab ideology. The other groups are tribal, Kurds, or radical Islamists with more of a fundamentalist bent than the Ba'ath Party.
Be me. Film school. One of the professors is this really disgusting, somewhat fat and smelly guy. I immediately dislike him, but everyone else seemed to be okay with him because he's smart. My disdain grows in time. Can't put my finger on it, but something's off about him. At the end of the semester, we have to take our written exam. He comes back with the results and says he lost my paper. Fuck no. .exe. Tells me I wasn't at the exam. Had the whole class backing me up and telling him I was. Eventually he concedes and tells me in private to come at his house on Saturday to find the paper together. Nope, .jpg. Go to the dean. The dean is this absolute Chad, who is also the only person who gets the same vibes from that guy. It seems that he also hates him and starts going on a rant about him. The dean tells me he'll take care of it. Starts a shit show with him. Tells me that they agreed I should take the exam again with another professor. Tell him I will not do that, and the professor needs to find my paper or give me top marks. Somehow he appreciates my balls and arranges that. The fat fuck smelly professor gets a grudge on me and looks at me odd after this incident. 1 year later, I find out he was a killer and got arrested. Apparently he killed his girlfriend in '98 but got away with it, 'cause his dad and mom were some big shots back then and pulled some strings. The case they had on him was also very flimsy, but they kept an eye on him. Both of his parents also died recently, and they couldn't pull the same strings for him. MFW, the police, broke into his apartment and found some kind of creepy altar to his dead girlfriend. MFW, that asked me to come to his house, and he probably would have killed me too.
Got a story somewhat similar to this. Be a student at a big commuter college in a Midwestern state that's now defunct due to a recent split based on real estate disputes. Get chummy with one of the professors there by virtue of being older and a map-painting game nerd. Pretty standard old-school globalization is a neutral force. But in the post-World War II environment, people are living longer, and basic metrics, which measure human quality of life, all indicate that it's for the better type of economics professor. Liked offshoring a little too much. Look him up and his achievements. Find that he was involved in setting up an orphanage and school in some godforsaken African country. Lots and lots of pictures of him smiling near the kids. Get a little uneasy when it becomes clear that one of the orphanages he was involved with shut down and investigated. Later learned that he took a sabbatical in Thailand. Basically, in hindsight, I was certain that the guy was a huge nonce. He had that sort of self-satisfied look to him that goes beyond what you normally see on self-satisfied academics.
My dad visited an orphanage in Africa, and he was showing me pics on his phone that he took during his time there. And I fucking swear to God that one of them was a pic of a little girl sucking his dick. I only saw it for a second because he started flicking through them really quickly. I think he wanted me to see it for some reason.
Not exactly a conspiracy, but on YouTube you can find channels run by Pakistani ladyboys documenting their parties/events. Quite good production values, shows them dancing for an audience, all male, who shower them with money. I assume they are also prostitutes. Go through enough linked videos and you start to find Urdu language videos showing young girls and boys being taught to dance, and contact details to book the boss, pimp, for parties. The children are often hit and the boys are taught to dance the feminine part of songs only, or are cross-dressing. A lot of people in the West don't know how the internet is used in the third world. A poor tribal might get a government-funded phone that only has the basics, with a strict internet filter, but including apps, which don't have filters. This is why Facebook is infested with Showbob and Vagine Indians when porn is readily available on the net. They can't access all that, so they hunt for it through the apps. TLDR. Brothels operate via YouTube, offering children.
Be me. Doing some odd jobs to make ends meet over COVID lockdowns. Do some voice acting for message banks, phone answering machines and shit. Do some manual editing of scanned-in documents that AI was doing most of it, but getting people to check for errors. Do some deliveries to disabled and special needs people. Get asked to record lines for a company that has no digital footprint. I couldn't find shit on them online. Read some fucked up documents about remote North Australian cattle stations being used to test bioweaponized tuberculosis on cattle. Get asked to deliver weird meat products to addresses that are very anti-disabled architecture. No clear sight lines, lots of lock, and no ramps. Ask no questions. Keep it to myself for years out of fear.
Okay, my story might be mundane though. Year 2011, Anan, me, is still a child. We get expensive cable with a lot of channels. This was back when I used to watch television a lot. I keep scrolling through different channels to find something to watch. There are multiple baby channels on there, and their content is so bad, and it feels like my IQ gets reduced whenever I stumble upon those channels, but I still sometimes watch them because they are so bad that they are entertaining. There is one in particular with horrible animations and drawings that looks like the channel's whole budget was only $5. I spend watching that one with the horrible cheap animations for at least 30 minutes. For some reason, the show suddenly stops. All of a sudden, this weird meditative/hypnosis section starts with a literal pyramid with an all-seeing eye. In that video, there were lights coming out of the all-seeing eye in a circular hypnotic way. The background is a dark blue, and the lights were red. The music seemed to be some weird frequencies that sounded like those meditation or binaural beats frequencies that you would hear. Me standing there going, what is this? It still continues even after 10 minutes. At this point, I'm as equally bored as I am weirded out, so I switched the channel. So, yeah, this is basically what happened. I kept searching on the internet to see if someone went through something similar that I did, but I can't find anything. I remember taking some weird-ass gate-adjacent test shit with block puzzles and cards in a windowless room one time, but that's about it. I also got thrown into special ed, even though throughout school I qualified for honors classes and got straight A's across the board every year.
Work in warehouse. Here managers begin to mention my name over radios carried by other managers. Here a certain manager begin to comment on everything I'm doing. Make report to HR. Everything gets worse. Manager begins singing my name, talking about me non-stop for entire shift. Ask employees with radios if anyone has been saying my name. They all say no, despite the fact they must have heard the psycho manager. Employees begin following and talking about me behind my back. Yo, he's crazy. Also, go to theaters to see End of Evangelion. Thought I heard 2 people in the back talk about me. Be too much of a pussy to confront them and rationalize it as them talking about someone else. Months later, see a manager wear an End of Evangelion shirt right when the harassment began to get worse. Pretty sure he wore that shirt on purpose.
I found out the whole world was rigged. Also, some company was stealing cars in Texas, basically. If you get into a crash in Texas, they will total your car and sell it before you even know what is up. The company was Touchpoint Call Centers. Also, this may be short, but it's big. In 2012, on this site, in a I Am From the Future, AMA thread, halfway through the thread, someone claimed to be from the future. Obviously, they were just some Illuminate's 12-year-old kid, but they spilled all the beans. They mentioned COVID-19 by name, said Trump would win in 2016, that he'd start a trade war with China, that they'd fuck our economy with a weak virus, and that there'd be war with Russia. Really not joking one bit. Our whole international everything is orchestrated. To me, it was obvious. When Trump was running against Hillary, I figured he'd actually win. When he fought with China, I figured they'd do a bio-attack. So I truly forgot about it, and only just remembered recently that he did mention COVID-19 by name. I remember highlighting it and committing it to memory now, and it was a weird name followed by a number, and I'm 100% sure it was COVID-19. I've mentioned this before, and people have suggested a few other screen caps or things. But no, this was in a AMA thread from 2012 while I was at my grandpa's on my Toshiba laptop.
What did he mention after Russia? Or did he coincidentally stop telling you about the future up until the moment we are at when you write this?
I don't know. I must be making it up because, yeah, it stopped right then. He said he was from the 2030s or 40s, was not specific. I'm actually telling you some real shit. My mom lost her job. I went to the wrong college for a semester. We both ended up back at her parents'. Then Grandma and Mom died and ruined my credit. So I had no working car for most of a few years and spent most of my time on this website. Every other I am from the future was just silly. And this dude was in the middle of someone else's thread. They really didn't go on any further, and I really did forget about it, and not even remember that he 100% said COVID-19 until this year. You cannot believe me or think I'm schizo, but I saw it with my own eyes, so this is my reality. I'm not just making it up to get a rouse out of anyone, and I genuinely hope some people believe. I don't want to shatter anyone's worldview that this whole world is nice and great. Most of the people here already believe conspiracies. But I do hope that people believe me because I'm telling the truth, and it's fucking big, obviously.
No outright conspiracy shit, but a lot of my life details scream conspiracy when I really think about it. Have paranormal encounters entire childhood. Suddenly stop when great-grandmother dies. Turns out cousin on other side of the country had the same abilities. Also lost them after great-grandmother dies. Have never met her till last year. RH, negative blood, same blood type as on Shroud of Turin apparently. Went to school with ties to a particular military IC company. Can remote view with practice. Read a person's mind once, can't explain that. Can trace lineage to Rosicrucians and pilgrims. Extremely good luck. Have been randomly asked if I'm famous. Was harassed by recruiters, but that's common, I hear.
I came across a self-proclaimed Rosicrucian group in my city that was hogging one of the very few manuscripts of a book that was never published and became an obscure urban legend in my country. I only found them because I was searching for the book for a long time, and one girl of said group fucked up and talked about it in a blog online where she said she wanted to translate the manuscript from the dialect it was written in to the national official language and said she was affiliated with said Rosicrucian group. Turns out the group was in my city. I tried to join them by trying to contact this girl. That didn't work. So I started scouting the Rosicrucian scene in my city. There's a couple places that a couple groups use, but still no luck. I ended up giving up.
Mexico?
No, Spain.
Are you able to reveal more information?
Sure, I doubt many people are looking for the manuscripts anymore. It's a novel called Ombra de Spill, The Mirror's Shadow. It became sort of known for a short while around 2009 or 2010 because despite being an obscure, unpublished novel, the wiki page disappeared without leaving a trace, and there were some people looking around for scans of the manuscript in onion forums and the dark web. Some fragments of the novel have been going around the internet for a long while, earlier than 2009 or 2010. The novel implements in its story these hypnosis techniques and pseudo-scientific approaches that some people swear they work. Mainly this Rosicrucian group that had the manuscript. It was pretty much their Bible. It's a novel about a secret society of wizards in Barcelona that was never published. Because of being extremely xenophobic, racist, and graphic, it was pretty much Nazi Harry Potter. I read part of the third chapter long ago, and it presented two teenagers who were trainee wizards and were chasing a Moroccan immigrant down the beach at night in the dark while laughing. They were flailing him with some sort of ether, that's how they call it, that they manipulate until he fell dead and bloody to the ground. The book also addressed the rest of Spaniards outside Catalonia as Zarnagos, impure. One time I met an Anon here that was from Barcelona. I saw him mentioning the novel in a post, but sadly he just knew what everyone else knew.
Interesting. My grandparents, who lived in Mexico, used to be Rosicrucians, according to my mum. Apparently, when my grandfather quit, they came to the house and removed a ton of old books.